Hello, Internet. Mike Byrne, aka Magic Man, here once again, and this time we're going to talk about being a new player to the competitive scene. Now, I've been working on bits and pieces of this video for about a week or so, but today on the North American Facebook page, I did see a big conversation about exactly this. So I wanted to finish putting it together and get my 2 cents out there for whatever it's worth. Take everything I say with a grain of salt if you want to. I am no Jamie Faulkner or Alex Hancox or Matthew Okamoto, but I am a bit of a grinder in the competitive scene. So this is kind of my take on how to improve as a new player in the competitive scene. Obviously, in a casual scene, practice, 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 you're going to improve over time. But if you're playing in the competitive scene, you likely want to get better as fast as possible, so that you're not traveling or paying for tournaments and then just getting shelled, more often than not. So in this video, we're going to take a look at exactly that. Now, we do have to make a few assumptions here to really put my advice into perspective. The first off being that you are familiar with the game. And I don't just mean that you know how to play. For instance, I have 4 or 5 videos on the training on my channel in a kind of a training series for those that want to learn how to play the game, but then want to learn how to play it at a competitive level. And while it's not in-depth super strategy type videos, they do go through detailed examples of how the stack works, things like that you need to be aware of to even think about entering the competitive scene. And granted, I will give you and Curtis Kang, of all people, can attest to this. I started going to competitive events probably before I should have, but I also had some experience, very minor experience, in other competitive card games, so I didn't feel too out of place there. But it's generally not the best way to learn the game, is to just jump into competitive events. There's some pre-work that should be done, and we'll talk about that in a second. But you do have to have a firm grasp on phases, when you can respond, when you can't, how things work together. It helps if somebody in your crew is either a judge or familiar enough to be a de facto judge to talk about different card rulings and interactions, how you use the stack, when best to do things on the stack. That's not this video. That's in-game strategy, and perhaps we'll do another video where we talk about some of that. But the training series I have on my channel does kind of cover the basic ideas of how to work the stack and interactions and when to do things. So if you haven't watched those and you feel you need to, please, by all means, check them out. And while you're there, give it a like. If you could, that would be great. The other assumption we're going to make is that you have a local scene, whether that's 4 of you that play consistently, whether that's 20 of you that play consistently. It doesn't matter. We have to assume, though, that you have either a local scene where you can practice against live players, or you are willing to play online using some of the unofficial versions on either Octagon or Untap or any of those versions, so that you have ways to play, because playing by far is going to be the best teacher. Amazing, right? Oh, funny how that works. Playing is going to be the best teacher. But assuming you have those 2 things, I do believe that I have a little bit that I can offer you as far as some additional tips. So let's start with you first starting out. The first thing you need to do is have that strong understanding of the game that I just talked about. The second thing is you need to use resources available, usually online, but sometimes through friends, to find decks that you may like. And then use those said resources to kind of find the meta. And this is the first place where a lot of brand new players kind of balk or don't understand exactly what's going on. The meta, the best way to think of the meta is the cards that are finding the most use because they are deemed to be the most powerful or most synergistic. That when they create a deck around those core concepts, it tends to be stronger than a lot of decks out there by a wide margin. That's a good way of thinking about it. Now, metas can differ, by the way. Your local meta between your 20 players, you and your friends that play every Saturday, may be very different than when you look at the national meta or even the global meta when you start taking into account crystal cups and things like that. So not only is it important to be aware of, I know what the 20 dudes and dudettes play at my locals, I'm going to build a deck that counters those decks effectively. That's basing your deck on your local meta. Totally fine and appropriate. But don't then expect to take that deck to a different locals or to a Crystal Cup or to a qualifier and expect the deck to perform the same way and as well as it did against your local meta, because the meta may be different. You might find a strong deck that you whoop up on all your local friends with because you've matched it against what they typically play, what they like to play, what they've been building. And so it's important to be aware of the meta around you. Now, I mentioned resources, and I'm going to use one as an example here. It's the one that I use all the time. I'm sure many, many others do that are watching this video, and that is FFDecks.com. Huge kudos to the FFDecks team. Now, this can be a little overwhelming for new players, and I've seen this an awful lot on Facebook posts where, hey, does anybody have any good ideas for decks around theme X? And somebody invariably just links FFDecks. Some people go that extra step and do a little searching and narrow it down, but for the most part, this site's just thrown out there. And it can be a little daunting if you don't know what you're looking for. Your first inclination might be to come to the website and simply click on deck lists in your left navigation bar there, and away you go, searching for particular element combinations, searching for decks that contain particular cards. And while that's all well and good, if you already have a starting point, you know you want to be a water fire player, for instance. You know you like some decks around that theme, and you know a couple of cards that you like messing with. This is a great way to find other decks that might be doing the same thing and show you some differences in your build to theirs. Not necessarily the best way to start searching for what is meta, what is out there, what are the strongest decks. So I do want to take a minute just to show you, to take a look at the Tournaments and Meta tab in your left navigation bar. This gives you a listing of any reported tournaments. Now, organizers can report any tournament they want, whether it's a 4-person locals all the way up to, 100-plus player Crystal Cup or qualifier. The best way to take a look and get a feel for what the meta is, whether you're in the United States, whether you're in Italy, whether you're in France, whether you're looking across the globe, is to take a look through some of these tournaments. Now, obviously, the further back you go, the less relevant they may be, because eventually you'll hit a date that precedes the current opus, and then the decks have changed since then. So usually you're going to be looking for the last 2 months, give or take, 2 to 3 months, so that way you're getting the most recent sets. Now, you can look at the participants, and I'm not going to tell you that 9 participants is any less valid than 117 participants. But just by understanding the math, you could understand that the top 8 in 117 players were probably playing decks that were stronger or maybe a little closer to what the meta is to make it there, since they had to go through presumably about 7 rounds of Swiss and then a couple best of 3s to make it to the top 8. There was a consistency there that maybe you wouldn't necessarily have in, say, Cincinnati Weekly's 9-participant tournament. That is not to say that the results there are any less valid or worth exploring. They certainly are, because somebody may have been playing a meta deck there and you want to take a peek at how they built it. And that's perfectly fine. But as a new player, I'd probably start with these bigger participants. Our Crystal Cup Earth Arizona just happened 2 weeks ago. Give a little click on that, and you can see the top 8 decks that went into the event, including Matthew Okamoto taking the event all the way down to the 8th place. Now, what am I seeing just on a cursory examination here? I'm seeing ice represented in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of 8 decks. So, all right, let's keep that in the back of our head. I'm seeing wind represented in 1, 2, 3 decks off the top of my head. And again, I might be missing one if they're only running 1 or 2 cards. So I see a lot of ice. I see a lot of wind. I see earth in 1, 2, 3, 4 decks. All right, so I have a good idea of some of the elements that may be playing into the current meta a bit more than other elements. But I also see a trend here in just this event. Take a look. I see this water, lightning, earth, ice combination once, twice, 3, 4 times, arguably, because Garbage Time doesn't have lightning in it. But I'm starting to see a trend. There are 4 pretty similar elementally built decks there in a 117-person event, and they went to the top 8. That might be a good place to start. Going back, I could take a look at other events. Has that trend held up? I can tell you that personally, just because I follow this stuff, no, it hasn't. That's a relatively newer one. But looking at these higher participants, 32, 33, 35, 55, count events, what am I seeing? Lots of wind. Looks like wind might be a meta color right now. And I can take some additional time to go into each of these decks and take a look at what they're doing. I see Yuri in almost every single one. I see Chelinka in almost every single one. I see Y'shtolas in almost every single one. Fina's, Bart's. I see similar backups. Maybe they're doing a little techie play here and there, but I'm starting to see, hey, there's a lot of wind that is present in the meta right now. And all the decks are very similar to the tune of about 35 cards. So if I'm taking a look at that, that gives me a great place to start looking at what might be more meta on a bigger scale. Now, do you want to play those colors? Or do you want to play against those colors? Either way, it doesn't matter. Maybe you don't like the playstyle of a mono-wind deck, and that's totally fine. Maybe you don't like a wind-water. You recognize that both of those might be particularly strong in any given meta, but it's just not your playstyle. That's fine. You do this research for the other reasons then. What are you going to be playing against? Right now in the meta, you're going to see a lot of mono wind and a lot of mono ice. You don't want to play either of those? Fine. You don't have to. But you need to recognize what is the meta so that you can plan to build your deck if it's not going to be ice or water or a mix or some of those quad color decks that have taken some recent events, both here in the United States and overseas. If you don't want to play those, that's fine. Do your research so that you know what you're playing against. Continuing on with other starting information, don't worry about owning cards yet. Proxy them up, bitches. For most of your locals, your fellow players aren't going to care about this. Some cards can be expensive. Maybe you want to play a deck a little bit before you shell out $35 for a Chelinka or whatever for a Wool or for a Sephiroth or for those more expensive cards. That's fine. If you don't have them and you can't trade for them on the spot, proxy them up, whether that be printing out black and white versions, which a person at my locals does and buys them off of us, trades for us, and the ones he doesn't have, he puts in black and white sleeves, just prints out a little picture of them. Fine, go ahead and do that. If you're just proxying one card, hell, take a different card, turn it face down. I've also seen somebody at our locals, good friend of mine, just write on comments, this is, a Minwu, or whatever. So proxy them up, play the deck a little bit, and then make the call on whether you want to invest in specific cards. Build your deck and play, over and over and over, including with yourself. Very poor wording, intentionally. Ha 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 ha, yes. Why do I say that? Because that's the best way to practice. And what do I mean by playing the game by yourself? Well, there's kind of 2 ways to do this. If you create a deck list on FFDecks, you can actually draw sample hands from it. So you can take a peek at what might be, a typical starting hand, and would you keep that? And this is after you've either built it or, as you saw, I just walked into, this person's Lightning Fire deck called Just Screwing Around and clicked on my little menu and drew a sample hand. Would I start with that? No. That's a 1 5-drop backup, 3 forwards, and a summon. Not exactly the best way to start the game. I'm going to mulligan that. And look, I mulligan into something a little bit better, which is good. So here we go. Now, I have a nice turn 1 play in Chaos. I have a nice turn 2 play in a 3-drop King of Burmecia that I really don't have to worry about color, because I'll have the option, because I'm going to play Chaos in the first turn, I'll have the option of discarding a Fire or a Lightning card to play King of Burmecia. It'll be my option based on what I draw. Now, if I was going first, I could draw 1 card and take a look at what my actual play hand was. If I was going second, I could draw a second one and take a look. So I'm in a pretty good spot here. You know, I might ditch Kane to play out Chaos, and then go ahead to my next turn and draw 2 more cards. Now I've got a Lease and a Nail. Nail not particularly good, but I'm running 3 in this deck, so maybe I ditch him, dull Chaos, play King of Burmecia, and go get me another Kane. Or an Estinian, or whatever. You start to see how you can play it out. Now, me being an old fart and liking the physical aspect of the game, I tend to do this right at my table. Shuffle up a deck and draw 5, play the turn, keep it or mulligan it, play the turn, draw 1, draw 2, whatever is appropriate for my turn, play it out. And I do this drill for hours. My wife thinks I'm nuts. I will do this drill for hours, just sit there, and I will play through turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, turn 4. What I typically do is I play as many turns as my brain doesn't have to think about what I'm doing. I know the cards in my deck. I know how many are there. I know what the deck wants to do. Typically, with a decent or good draw, I'm on autopilot for the first turn or 2. I'm more focused on getting information about my opponent's deck at that point. When I stop, you know, because you could keep playing. Look, I got 5 backups and 15 forwards. Man, I'm doing great. Well, yeah. That doesn't get you anywhere, though. When I typically stop is when I hit the turn, whether it's turn 3 or turn 5 or turn 6, doesn't matter. When I hit the turn that I'm looking at the backups I've played, I'm looking at the forwards I've played, I'm looking at my hand, and my next play would depend on what I was facing, what the opponent had done. That's when I take it all back, shuffle it up, and I do it again. And you can run this over, this little drill of over and over and over. For an hour, you'll bang out like 50 of them, 40 or 50 of them, because you're constantly bam, 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 turn 3. Now, based on what my hand is, I got a couple summons, I got a couple forwards that have ETBs. I'd really need to see what the opponent had done at that point to decide what the next best play is. Pick it up, shuffle it, start it again. This also gives you an idea of how consistent your deck is going to be getting its backups out, having a nice turn 2 play that's on curve as far as the CP spend. These little things that you may not be thinking about as a new player. Is it beneficial to put a 2-drop backup out on the first turn so that you have a 3-drop backup that you're paying exactly for on turn 2? Yes. Does your deck do that more often than not? Again, take out the occasional just brick. Decks do it. It's random. And look at the bigger picture. So yeah, play with yourself. But now what? Let's say you've got a grasp on all that. You've done a little research on the meta. You've found something you like in the meta, or you know what you're going to build, and you're aware of what the meta is to go against. What do you do at that point? Well, at that point, that's when you learn a lot from losing, as the old adage says, over and over and over again. Play, 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 play. Lose, 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 and you will learn. But what everybody forgets about that adage is you have to want to learn. We all get mad. We all get on tilt. We all get grumpy when we take a loss. I do it myself. My local friends will tell you just as much. I'm famous for, after a bad beat, give me 3 minutes. I'm going to go have a cigarette. Let's not talk about it. I'll come back. Then we'll talk about it. And if that's you, by all means do that. But you have to be willing to learn from your losses. What did your deck do well? What did it lose against? Why? Was there something you could have done in your deck or put in your deck that isn't there now that would have prevented this loss? Again, discard those you drew like shit and your opponent drew god hands over and over again. Those things happen. It's a card game. And maybe you couldn't do anything about that. You just bricked forward after forward after forward after forward. It happens. But in the long term, after 20 games, what was killing you? Was it ping damage? Was it summons that you didn't have counters for? Was it having too many big forwards and you weren't able to get them out in time? Was it early game aggression? Was it discard? What caused you to be put on the back foot and stay there until you lost the game. Learn as many cards as you can while you're doing this. This just comes from repetition. You're not going to go to the website FFDex and look at their card catalog and memorize the damn thing. Your meta cards, you will learn very quickly if everybody is playing on or near meta. You'll learn them very quickly. You don't even need to read Chelinka to know all of Chelinka's abilities. Yuri has 4 abilities that can be chosen from. You don't need to read Yuri to know what 4 abilities are there because you've seen it a million times, you're playing it a million times. Learn as many cards as you can. This is going to help you in patching the holes in your deck. What decks were you weak against? Were there specific decks? Was wind just killing you? You can win every matchup, but wind just, its ability to splash forwards on the board and still have 5 backups up for a summon later was just too much for you. What were you weak against? Play those decks. Not just your deck against them. Yes, that's certainly helpful. Build that deck, even if you have to proxy the entire damn thing. Play that deck with your friends piloting your deck. Learn why they beat you and find the holes in your deck from the other side. The best way, at least in my own personal experience, some may differ, to find the holes in your deck after you know your deck inside and out. That's key. You have to know your deck inside and out. What are your outs? How many of each are in the deck? When is it okay to get rid of something so that you can make a better play? You have to know your deck inside and out. But the best way to find the holes in your deck, ironically, for me, is not to play my own damn deck. I play the decks that beat my deck. And I hand my deck to friends to play it against me while I'm playing that mono wind or that mono ice deck. The best way to find the holes is crush your own deck with those things. Find the gaps, find why you're losing against that particular deck, and then go to the card database and see if there's cards that can help counter that. Make changes to your deck, but don't make changes for one round and change it back if you lose. If you're going to change something about your deck, go ahead, but leave it there. A good rule of thumb is get it anywhere from 5 to 20 matches with that change. Some changes may not be that serious. Maybe you have 3 Diabolos in your deck and you're thinking, I could probably get away with 2. All right, try that for a round or 2 and see how it feels. But those bigger changes, your deck is losing, it runs water and it's losing against mono wind a lot. And you didn't have a Minwoo in there. So you want to try the deck with a Minwoo. Does that help you in your wind matchup without sacrificing the other matchups? Well, you have to have a bunch of matchups to be able to decide that. You can't put 2 Minwoos in your water deck, go against wind, lose twice, and decide that didn't help, buy Minwoo. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Again, as big a picture as you can gather, and knowing the cards certainly helps here. Common new player mistakes that I'm going to caution you to avoid, and I've made every single one of these, so don't think I'm talking about a high horse, and I'm sure I still make some of these from time to time, and probably always will. Don't splash your hand out at the beginning of the game simply because you can. Sometimes 3 backups on turn 1 feels good, looks cool, you're going to be set. But if your deck isn't really built to do that every single time and survive, you could pay for splashing hands out like that. The biggest mistake that I see new players make, and I made as a new player, is splashing the board in turn 1 or turn 2 with 2 forwards, 2 backups, or something like that, 3 forwards, and no backups. You'll get off to a great start typically, and then you'll run out of steam because you're playing from behind on the card draw. And if you're playing against any deck that has you discard at the same time, you now have put yourself in a really bad spot. You're only getting 1 and 2 cards per hand. You hand it out pretty much at the beginning, and they're making you discard 1 or 2, so you're almost feeling forced to play. So if you're going to splash your hand out, it better be what your deck is made to do. Don't assume every card in your deck is important in every match. It doesn't need to be. And following with the example that we were just discussing, Minwoo running 1 of or 2 of in your water deck because of the wind matchup being a bit of a pain in the ass for you, Minwoo becomes a pretty important card. All right, fine. I agree with you in that particular scenario. But then when you go and play against some other deck, maybe Mono Earth, let's say, Minwoo doesn't have the same priority. So you need to be watching what your opponent is playing and make some educated guesses to prioritize the cards you know are in your deck. If I'm going against Mono Earth, maybe I'm more likely to discard for CP in early game Minwoo. If I'm going against Mono Wind, I'm going to hang on to that Minwoo. You need to be able to react just by the information you're seeing on the board. When you see that first backup, that second backup, and you start to get an idea of what's going on, you need to prioritize the cards that are in your deck. Continuing on with some of these, and I'm sure there's others that people will put in the comments, please do. Don't make plays that only look good this turn. It's really exciting when you can play something, break something, swing and do a damage, and then get a discard on top of it. That looks like a really cool turn. You killed a forward, you did some damage, and you cost them a card. But was it the best play for the game? Really looked cool in that turn, but did it make your second turn and third turn after that turn any better? Did it set you up to be paying for things in the most CP efficient way possible? Did it set you up to be able to defend or attack and give you the best possible edge? It's really exciting to make plays that look great on that turn, but also consider the turn after that and the turn after that. Where will I be then if I do this super sweet badass play right now? Is it the best thing for me to do? And don't assume a few losses makes your deck bad. I've seen this a bunch all over the place. Yes, there is a meta, right? But any deck can usually beat any other deck if the stars align for one player's draw and don't for the other player's draw. I've seen decks that have no right, under normal circumstances, beating a severely super meta deck. But it happens when the meta deck draws like crap and your goofy deck that has this, weird combo in it drew exactly what you needed to pull that combo off. So by all means, have some fun with it, but don't assume just because you lost a single game that your deck is bad and needs to be thrown out and 20 cards need to be reworked in it. Now that we're there, we need to improve. We've got our deck. We've started working on how that deck is going to win. We've set up our win con. We know the cards. We know what's in our deck, and we've prioritized them. How can we improve? Learn your matchups now. What is the opponent playing? What is likely to be in that deck? This one comes with experience. So when people tell you, play more, play more, play more, play more, it's not a generic answer. But what may be missing from that sentence is play more because you will learn more about your deck and which cards might not be the best to stay in there. And more importantly, you will learn more about the cards in general. When somebody puts down that Harley, turn 1, with their ice deck, boop, in your brain. All right, I'm probably going to see Edward. That's going to make me discard a card. If I'm seeing Edward to make me discard a card, I may be seeing these other cards that make me discard a card. Locke and Sephiroth and Sarah and Argath and all of those things. So I need to be ready to probably start discarding cards. That means right now, before I've had to discard anything, I need to start prioritizing which cards I need to keep, which ones I need to get out fast before I before I end up having to discard them. All right, let's go to another matchup. I start seeing some particular Earth backups. I get an idea that this person might be playing, the Cat 15 package, the Category 15 package. Maybe I'm going to see Arden. I'm definitely going to see Noctis. What cards in my deck deal with Noctis? Start getting that level of familiarity with the cards. Learn your matchups. As soon as you see the opening play or two, get an idea of what am I likely to see. All right, 2 turns in, I'm seeing nothing but ice, discard, and 2 backups. Is probably safe to assume right now my opponent's on mono ice. I'm probably going to see Soryu and Sephiroth and this and this and this. I'm seeing the first turn backup played as Alhanalim. I can pretty much bank on the fact that Chelinka and Yuri are in that deck. Do they pose problems to me? How am I going to deal with them when they appear? And now I know which cards in my deck I need to keep, because I have a problem I know I'm going to come across, and I need to keep my answers to that problem. Prioritize the cards in your deck based on that information. Research the meta on a consistent basis. Now, it doesn't change from day to day typically, but with certain events, obviously, new sets coming out, boom, that one definitely changes the meta. But things like banning of cards. Riku just got banned, totally changed the meta. You saw a lot of Water Wind discard, high up on tournament lists. Riku got banned, all of a sudden, falls off the meta list. Doesn't mean it's not the strongest anymore, but it means that it's fallen out of meta favor in favor of other decks. So you do want to research it on a consistent basis. You don't have to check it every day or anything, but every couple of weeks, it's nice to go and thumb through the last few tournaments and see what won. Watch streams and videos of the game being played, particularly things like Crystal Cups or various national tournaments. I have never met Alex Hancox. I've never met Jamie Faulkner. I briefly met Matthew Okamoto, but I didn't want to interrupt him because he was in between two games at a Crystal Cup. I've met a lot of high-caliber players. Not one of them has sat down and taught me something about the game, but every single one of them has taught me something about the game. What do I mean? I've watched them play, whether it was in person or on a stream or on a YouTube video of a Crystal Cup or a various national tournaments. Every single one of them, by watching their game, has taught me something. One could be something as simple as a card interaction that I never thought of. Oh, that's really neat. I should try that. I actually want to try that in a deck of mine. Sometimes they've taught me different things about responding. Maybe I've been responding with Diabolos in this situation when I should have been letting something resolve and then do it because I get a better outcome or a more predictable outcome for me or an advantage of some type. I've learned something from all of these high-level players, and I've never sat down and received a single lesson from them. You can sit there in the comfort of your own home and rewind because you didn't understand what happened over the last 3 plays until you get it. That is a great way to improve, and you can do it on your own time. Finally, be able to tell when a deck just isn't working. I know I talked about don't give up on a deck right away, but there is realistically a time when you need to be able to tell when a deck just isn't working and move on from it or modify it. Don't be too proud to throw it out if you need to. I've thrown out many. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you have tips for other brand new players to the competitive scene, by all means, put them in the comments below. Maybe we'll regroup and do another follow-up video to this one later. Until then, gang, this is Mike Byrne, aka Magic Man, saying stay safe and stay out of that break zone.